powered by Reviting, streaming from the Reviting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to another episode of the David Daily. We're streaming live from Chelsea here in New York City, a wonderful, beautiful place. It's a sunny day today. We're in the midst of New York Tech Week. And if you're tuning in or watching this later, thank you for all of the people who have been so supportive of live streaming and video on LinkedIn. The only way to go live on LinkedIn and post long form on LinkedIn is to go live stream. And today we have a very special guest today who is also based here in the city as well, Afsheen. Afshar, welcome to the show. You're the head of Pilot Wave Holdings. I'm excited for our conversation. It's going to be such a good call.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? You're previously Chief Data Science Officer at JP Goldman Sachs. I mean, you're an investor, you're AIML. I mean, I can't even give you all the credit in your long list of resume, but we're just going to have a conversation today. But for those folks who are listening for the first time who may have not met you before, just tell us a little bit about yourself and who you serve and a little bit more about Pilot Wave Holdings.
Well, first, appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. Great to meet you. If I were to sum up sort of what I'm about in a sentence, it would be really operating at the intersection of technology, broadly defined, business operations, investing, and taking a very empathetic lens to all of that. So that's, I think, sums up really sort of what I've been able to be a part of. As you noted, right, what I do today is I'm the founder and CEO of Pilot Wave Holdings. We're an acquisition company. As of now, a totally self-funded vehicle to acquire physical businesses and grow them with artificial intelligence. We've been doing it for about going on 8 years now, growing to about 20 people globally and done a bunch of deals, which we can get into. Before that, I enjoyed very senior roles in large firms, kind of doing this similar sorts of things. Chief AI Officer of Cerberus Capital, which is a private equity fund. Before that, as you mentioned, Chief Data Science Officer at JP. Both of those roles happen to be the first of their kind in their respective industries. Before that, Managing Director at Goldman. Before that, academia. So I have a PhD in what would now be called AI from Stanford. And I'm also a medical doctor. So happy to answer any medical questions if they come up.
Nice. What haven't you done in your career? This is just an awesome lineup, but obviously you're more than your career. So we're going to get into our 3 topics today. For those tuning in for the first time, we have 3 topics: funding, faith, and future. So we're going to jump right into funding here. All right. Our first topic of funding, we have a little intro video we like to play. I'm going to share that real quick.
Time to talk about funding.
All right, so here at Tech Week, there's so many founders and there's a couple of investors and there's not a ton of operators and there's not necessarily a ton of checks being written, but you've been writing checks for the past 8 years in your fund. So, why is institutional capital missing small business AI? It's such a good topic. Let's get into why institutional capital is missing these investment opportunities with small business AI.
Yeah, let's define some terms a little bit, right? So.
Yes.
Institutional capital, I think that's probably the most straightforward, at least most easily recognizable definition. These are folks who invest for a living. Generally, people think about larger institutions, tens, hundreds, billions of dollars, that sort of thing. Small business AI, that's a little, in my view, a little bit of a slippery or more slippery one. I think about it from my bias as deploying or applying AI to small business. And there's a lot of opportunity. And I think, many folks, not just us, have woken up, especially in the past couple of years, to the opportunity of applying AI to those small businesses. Small business usually means anywhere between $2 million of profit to $200 million of profit. That's generally the scope. And these are things like your local restaurant chain or your small business that's doing construction, general contractor, or trucking, or things like this. These are all businesses that we know very, very well. So what is institutional capital missing? I think that they miss a lot of potential because I go back to culture, I go back to empathy. I think typically, not always, but typically, the institutional capital folks are founded by people who have financial backgrounds, who have experience in structuring, who have experience in the capital markets. These are things that are very important in order to raise funds and know how to invest funds. But notice what I didn't say. What I didn't say is operating small businesses, and certainly not understanding technology, especially given how fast technology has been moving. So when you have folks who have been trained and are experienced in doing a certain set of things that are somewhat disjoint or somewhat separate from what they would need to know how to do to find the opportunities in small business using AI, it's a natural consequence that those folks are maybe don't see those opportunities, or maybe blinded by them, or maybe discount them, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. I was talking to a founder recently in the call it like the mechanical engineering space for chemical companies, specifically in product and consumer products. And investors just don't understand, people are building these businesses with paper, pencils, dials, and knobs. There's actually no technology in some of these spaces that are creating like toothpaste, for example,
Yep.
or shampoo. And they're highly regulated because of chemicals and that sort of a thing. So yeah, investor education is a huge piece. So how do investors get more educated on what technology innovation is going to really help them? And maybe I could put those business owners there too, because technology is moving so fast, right? How do we educate more people on what technology advances are going to be really table stakes in the next 10 years?
Well, 10 years, I would be, I was with you until you said 10 years, because nobody, including myself, can see 10 years out. The advancement is too rapid. And we were having a discussion with my wife just last night on how to teach our kids. We have two young kids, girls, 9 and soon to be 12. And we're both, my wife and I, both very technical. And we think, well, what are we supposed to teach our kids? And I go back to, you need, the role for people has always been at the highest level, knowing what questions to ask and knowing how to think about problems. Meaning, how do you break down a problem into its constituent parts and then direct, in this case, a virtual team to then execute on that problem. That's the core skill. That's always been the core skill, and that will continue
Right.
to be for the foreseeable future, the core skill. So I think about tools as tools. Meaning that 100 years ago we had pencil and paper and compass and protractor, and now we have incredible AIs. But the tool is not ever the most important thing. It's the value you bring to it. It's if you're a company, your customers, or your counterparties, or your investors. And that's really what we focus on. Not to sound too repetitive, but we really think about empathy and workflow and EQ. And to whatever degree small business folks are listening to this, or investors are listening to this, I think you can never, you'll never find yourself short if you focus on the people aspect first.
Wow. You said EQ and protractor in the same sentence. My mathematical kid brain from math theory class in the 7th grade, it's on fire right now. But yeah, you're so true. How do people get more emotionally intelligent, right? There's that EQ 2.0 book from back in the day that kind of educated the masses on emotional intelligence, right? And to me, that means not knowing just what emotion you're feeling or sensing, but also why you're sensing those emotions. And then also then, in addition to that, how are you going to respond, not react to that? So in a day and age where technology is very not personal, how do you advise people to be more maybe emotionally sensitive and empathetic in the way that they deal with people, especially when, look, people are craving connection in person, right? Gone are the days of, the remote only. People want that. They crave those in-person experiences. So being an AI leader, early on Wall Street and being someone who's taking that obviously to private equity and now on Main Street, how do you integrate that into your investment principles?
I just think you have to value it, right? It's going to sound very simple,
Right.
maybe not easy for folks, but it's just the top of our priority list. That's it. If you value it, you will prioritize it, you will put energy against it, and then eventually capital and will flow to it. It is the first thing that everyone at my firm thinks about is the people aspect. It's the
Right.
first thing that we bring to every conversation with new management, starting from myself. It's the first thing we bring to conversations with employees of the company. It's the first thing we bring to structuring our deals. So when you put that as something you care about, then you make actions, business actions that are consistent with that. So we structure our deals in a way that my former colleagues at my former firms may blanch in terms of how much economics we include on the other side for our management teams and our employees. But it is what we value. It is our North Star that folks may have heard me speak about many times. So you just need to value it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let's dive a little bit into that, Afsheen, like practically speaking. Can you give us like a practical example of how you integrate empathy and the people values into deal structures when you're considering a deal, maybe it's a team or maybe
Yeah.
it's a specific industry or vertical that you're really all in on. And
Yeah.
I'm being generic on purpose because I want this to be as timeless as possible, right? This show is going into the archives forever, which is awesome. I can't wait to see where we are in 10 years. But practically speaking, like how do you actually integrate those values into the deal structure?
Great question. So you'll forgive me if I become a little bit technical because we have to talk
No,
about
please be technical. We have a technical audience.
how people structure deals. So let's start with the basics, right? So I like to use the metaphor of buying real estate when you talk about buying a company, because many
Right.
folks in your audience are familiar with buying real estate. So the way you buy real estate often, most of the time, is you go get a loan from a bank to put up a mortgage, and you put in some equity capital, and then over time, you pay down that mortgage and therefore own the house. If you take it one step more complex and say, well, I'm not necessarily buying my own residence, I'm buying an apartment building, that metaphor is pretty close to buying a company. So now we're getting the same situation. We're getting a loan from a bank to go, and we put up some equity capital and we go buy an apartment building, and the tenants of that building will pay rent. And if you manage your finances correctly, the sum total of all the rents, minus the expenses of managing the property, are going to give you some amount of a profit, free cash flow. Great. So that's how you think about a company with that metaphor, buying an apartment building. So in our analogy here, the employees and the management of that company are going to be the folks who are managing that apartment building for the owners, right? So I'm sure you've heard of real estate management companies that are businesses in their own right. So those are, quote, the management of this company in this metaphor. So what we do is we give them equity and equity-like consideration as part of this deal. So that free cash flow that's coming out, they get a fraction of it. And there's market for what that fraction can be. And like any market, people disagree about what the edges are, but we're always on the top edge is how I would think about it. So we give them what we would consider to be much higher than market equity-like compensation, whether it's profits, interests, or actual shares or options or whatever it is. So that's the short way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that little practical bit. That's very practical. People can understand that. So integrating that human element, so important. So since we're talking about funding in this first category, I want to dive a little bit deeper in there, especially to discuss how private equity family offices and investors are actually evaluating AI opportunities. For context, I met an investor who recently had a pretty nice exit, and he had 5 criteria. One was vertically integrated AI, right?
Yeah.
Second was like a very tangible output and metric. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how would you recommend evaluating AI opportunities today, given there's so much hype? You're not really a hype person because you're so early. You're more about implementation.
Yeah.
What are some of those key points, or like these are like key criteria for any opportunity that we'll invest into?
Well, look, venture and seed investing is its own thing, right? And in part of my previous roles at Goldman and JP, part of that role was being involved in the venture-like activities that those firms would do. So it's not something that's foreign to me, but it's a very different thing that as you just noted, between venture investing and seed investing and private equity style. So just so your audience is clear. We're all clear what we're talking about. In the venture style, you are really investing and backing a team and a plan the earlier you're investing in the cycle. So, it's obviously these different stages, pre-seed, seed, and so forth. So the earlier you get into that, the more it's about the people and the plan. And the later you get, the more it's about the proven traction and the economics. And when you get into private equity, it's really, almost the totality of the investment decision is around the track record and the unit economics and things like, and the balance sheet and things like this. So to your point of evaluating an AI opportunity, by definition, since AI is so new, almost all of those opportunities that one might evaluate, at least investing in an AI company, is on the earlier side of that. So you really have to look at the business plan as best you can and the team as best you can. And unfortunately, as your question, I think, rightly noted, there are very few people who have the background and the context to evaluate either of those things. So what you've seen in the community is folks looking for proxies of comfort for those two items. And, just to pick an obvious example, for instance, if there's a founder of a new AI company that's come from, a frontier AI lab, they generally can raise money in an afternoon. And the reason for that is because the market believes that the frontier model company like an Anthropic or a Grok or whatever has given them some experience that gives them some edge on developing AI. I think the jury is out, candidly, on whether or not that's true or how true that is. But certainly, if you are a follow-on investor and your goal is to exit 10x what you went in, the market as a whole seems to be giving very ample value and rich valuations to companies that have that kind of foundership. And as a consequence, if you sort of pick the right time to exit, you may actually do quite well with that strategy.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that. This is really fantastic. By the way, super educational, very relevant, very practical. So acquiring versus funding. There's a fund that we're partnering with that basically funds acquisitions. So what separates a company worth acquiring versus one worth funding, like build or buy? Let's dive into that a little bit on the funding side.
Can you give me a little bit more parameters on the question? Are you talking about investing in tech companies, or are you talking about investing in physical companies? I would have very different points of view, one versus the other.
Well, we are talking about AI and tech, so let's talk about like frontier tech, deep tech, that sort of a thing, and then we can also maybe apply it to something that's maybe more capital intensive for a physical good. But let's start with tech first, and then we can go into the physical good side.
So so the question is, when should we buy a tech company versus invest in that tech company? And there, I'm reminded of sort of the special situations groups I've worked with in the past, not to dodge the question, but the answer is it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on the capability of the acquirer versus the opportunities that being an investor can bestow on the investment. So if you're a venture investor, very often, your value in that situation beyond your capital is your network, your wisdom, accrued wisdom, your ability to analyze macroeconomic trends, things like this. And if that is the majority of what you view as an investor value to be, then I think being an investor is probably the right route for most situations, especially in the AI world today. If, in addition to those first things, you think you can offer actual technical expertise, actual technical capability, because you own a business that allows you to be vertically integrated, to use a phrase that you mentioned a moment ago. If from that integration, from that additional technical capability, you believe that you can get synergies that get dramatically higher returns, then it makes a little bit more sense to buy than it does, or acquire, than it does to necessarily just invest. But that requires a good amount of, frankly, introspection, because and also observation, and maybe a bit of humility, just coupled with the right kind of arrogance. So it's a little more complex than that. Right. But I think that's how I would try to think about the two different extremes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just think of like the classic business case where Coca-Cola, right? They had this beautiful ingredient, and then they went and acquired a bottling company. because they were bottling so much, but also because of their cycling, they were able to see economies of scale, and it just made sense for them to own that vertical. Okay, so before we get into faith topics, I want to ask one last question on the funding side.
Yeah.
If you were to deploy 10 million tomorrow, where
Yeah.
would it go? And what industries do you think are maybe undervalued or undercapitalized today?
So I'm going to forgive myself for giving a very selfish answer. I would give it
Yeah,
to Pilot
please.
Wave. I think we're doing the best thing in the world, and you should give it to us. So that's what I'm deploying my money, like my 10
Right,
plus $1 million against. I would be a little bit hypocritical if I didn't answer that way, but
of course.
maybe less flippantly. Look, there's going to be a few huge IPOs that are going to happen.
Right,
I think it would be foolish to not have any exposure to those at all. I wouldn't want too much exposure to that, but I think it's foolish to not have any exposure to that. I think it's obvious that the vertical supply chain, if you like, of AI is
right,
going to be something that is going to outlast any potential bubble burst that may or may not occur. Uh,
right.
so that includes everything from the power grid. I would go all the way from power. I mean, I think Sam Altman says electrons, which is kind of an awkward way to put it in my view, but I know what he means. He means
Right,
power. And I agree with him 100%. So everything from the power grid, which is something that actually Pilotway does invest in, all the way through to data centers, to cooling mechanisms,
right,
HVACs and things like this, to things like real estate, to site selection, to things like the hardware involved to manage these data centers, to the chips themselves, the NVIDIAs and their soon-to-be competitors, to down to the technical infrastructure of AI. There's several labs that I'm aware of that are working on improving how the training process occurs. I would pick and choose those. Obviously, you need to be pretty technical to know which is which.
right.
To sort of the platforms that think about optimizing AI when it's deployed. I think there's a lot of fertile ground there. Now, as you get more and more niche, you need more and more differentiated technical acumen yourself to understand this is good and this is bad, or this is good and this is bad. But as famously, it's been famously said, during a gold rush, you sell the picks and shovels, right? You don't necessarily go to try to get the gold yourself. So that's probably the safest bet for most people.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And selfishly for yourself, where are you putting your investment dollars in terms of industries and types of businesses? I know you mentioned
Yeah.
obviously AI and vertical AI, but where else would you want to highlight for those who are listening later and they want to get involved with Pilot Wave Holdings?
Yeah, I mean, what our North Star is really helping society by rebalancing the power between Main Street and Wall Street and Silicon Valley. That's what we do. The way we
Yeah,
do that is by acquiring these physical businesses and growing them with world-class AI capability. So we buy things like construction companies. I just mentioned the power grid,
right,
utility services businesses, the logistics firms, manufacturing companies, the retail supply chain, and e-commerce, and then we stitch it all together with proprietary AI that only know how to build. So all those businesses are important to the United States, North America. I would argue to global capitalism,
right.
and those are things that we believe in, and that's why we devoted our lives to it.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for that. And we've had a couple of guests on here talking about projecting energy needs into
Yeah.
the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. So yeah, this is quite relevant for the show. So really appreciate that. Well, thanks for folks tuning in. We're going to get right over into the faith topics. We've got a special guest here with you, Afsheen. This is such an inspiring conversation for people who are just starting to get into investing or even more advanced investors. And of course, we're getting technical as well. So let's jump into our next topic of faith.
Focusing on faith for a moment.
All right, so we use the word faith so intentionally here, not religion, not anything else, but what does faith mean to you? Let's start there.
Faith, I'm going to reveal my scientific training here. Faith to me means believing in something without the necessary evidence that would otherwise make you think something is true. That's what faith means to me.
Yeah, I
And
love
everyone
that.
has faith of some kind.
Yeah, it's like I like the scientific theory, like it's false until proven true.
Yeah.
So let's prove all the false cases to be null, and then we have truth. So now people obviously will associate this with religion, and this is not a religious show, but we're raised in a Christian nation. We have all sorts of religions. Freedom of religion is so important in our nation. Was there a religious or faith-based perspective early in your childhood that influenced those values, that empathy that you have? And if so, what was it?
I think the answer to that is both no and yes. No, because there's not a particular religious denomination that I would ascribe to believing
Right.
literally or metaphorically. That said, I grew up in the United States. I grew up in a household that was largely, broadly speaking, spiritual, and the Western sort of culture is, as you noted, a Christian or a Judeo-Christian
Right.
or a monotheistic, or however you want to Abrahamic, however you want to categorize it, culture. And I think the innovation of that culture is, as if one can call religious teachings innovation, was an unusually large focus on empathy, I would say. Again, I'm not a religious person at all, but obviously you hear the stories and read the stories. And if you look at the founding of the various different prophets of those religions, they did focus a lot more on empathy and being your brother's keeper and so forth than I think folks used to do thousands of years before that. So you can't help but be influenced by that. And obviously I, like everyone else, was and am. But there's also personal temperament, right? I mean, it is my personal temperament to want to help people. It's why I became a physician.
Right. So in that world of physicians and healthcare, tell us a little bit about how you balance that faith. Like, I'm sure you've seen miracles in healthcare, but you also are backed by science. And it's
Yeah.
like divinely, like, if you think like, okay, there's divine intelligence, there's machine intelligence, and there's human intelligence. This paper came out called Righteous AI from the University of Washington that basically said, hey, universally, categorically, religions of the world can say that divine intelligence kind of supersedes that of humans. So you could say, in essence, God created doctors. God created us. I mean, our parents created us biologically.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that in a world of science? I mean, medicine is just so science-driven, right?
Yes, I would say the metaphor to think is that science is to medicine as math is to engineering. So it
Right.
is, or logic is to the legal profession.
Philosophy. Right.
For philosophy. So it is the applied version of the science. And look, I've seen, I hesitate to use the word miracle or not, but I've seen things that were very unlikely occur. And I must, just for the audience, my medical career was, in the grand scheme of things, very, very, very short, but it was long enough to have seen, hundreds and thousands of patients and seen a variety of outcomes, good and bad,
Right.
that shaped who I am today pretty profoundly. And I'm very grateful for that. And, it's to answer your question perhaps more directly, I think that you approach it with all the knowledge that you can bring to bear. And part of that knowledge is, and part of that value is your empathy. And, it was very important to me to treat my patients with everything I had to help them, every aspect of them. Right.
Right. Yeah, it's tough, right? My mom was a nurse, and it's a balance between, profit in hospitals and actually getting to a favorable outcome. And I recently had have a grandmother who went into hospice, and even
Sorry.
though there's this notion that hospice is where people go to, have a healthier and more comfortable, palliative care driven life, she's actually healthier than she was necessarily seeing all these doctors. One, because she doesn't have to leave her house, but secondly, because, they got the medicine right, and, there's more just family attention, which has nothing to do with the doctor. So, yeah, I think sometimes you just need that little prompt, that little prick the butt, if you will, to get you moving along. So when it comes to faith, our topics today are really around, it's like interesting, it's like tariffs and also like, I don't know, AI costs and capital conviction. I mean, these are real things that have affected us. I mean, the cost of energy has increased significantly more recently. We will see increase in cost of energy. We'll probably see a decrease in, energy costs at some point soon, hopefully. But what role does your belief in the economy and your belief in some of these things that maybe outside of our control, how do you integrate those things into your daily and your decisions as an executive at an investment firm?
Again, I'm going to reveal my mathy and sciencey background. I mean, I think,
Reveal. I think we already know you're mathy and sciencey.
yeah. I mean, the way I try to think about it, well, I try to balance both parts of me, right? The empathy part with the mathy part, and I think that's what gives
Right.
what gives us differentiated value. If it's something you can't control, then it's something you can't act on, but it's not something you can't model, right? So you can ascribe probabilities to things. You can prescribe expected values to outcomes. You can give them distributions of likelihood, and you can incorporate that in your decision making. That's what humans, by the way, even if I would argue that even if you may not be doing that explicitly, consciously, we all do that all the time, right? We do that. Let me pick a stupid example that just came to me now, which is when you are walking the street. You strike me as a very high-powered person. You're probably on your device most of the time, communicating to all the people that depend on you and that you work with. When you are crossing the street, you are making calculation to look in your phone while you do that because you don't think someone's going to hit you in Manhattan, because they likely won't hit you in Manhattan. You'll probably do a quick glance, but then go back to your phone. That is a calculation you've made. Now, the outcome, if that happens, is really, really, really negative. Everything from, a near miss, as you might say, to, potentially, devastating outcome. But you've made that a calculation. And I would argue it's likely the right calculation to get the benefit of the delta productivity that you've gotten. So we're always doing things that we can't control. You can't control if that person is going to hit you, but you've modeled it in your mind. And we just do the same things for, any number of topics. You mentioned tariffs. One of the things that the current administration has given us, like them or not, is volatility. And meaning that it's hard to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, which, we don't know. I don't know. And most people don't know. Maybe even they don't know. But the bottom line is you can model that somehow, right? You can say, hey, it's going to be in this scope of things. This is the probability of outcomes, and therefore we're going to act this way. And you've seen the market actually do what I've said. Because I think if there were another administration, oil prices would be way higher than they are today. But what they've baked in is how this administration seems to interact with the world. And we have these 4-letter acronyms that the folks use to say, hey, this is going to happen or not. And people trade off of it. So I think you see people doing it all the time.
Yeah. Maybe just a follow-up question on that is how do you maintain faith in a world of volatility when so much is changing?
Well, you have to find your essence, the North Star, what grounds you. You grounds you personally and professionally. And we strongly believe at my firm and myself that capitalism and democracy are the right ways in which for humans to self-govern. Neither of those things is perfect. I'm not going to sit here and say either of them is perfect. I think it's the best we've come up with so far as human beings in the however many thousands of years we've had civilization. And we are committed to doing everything we can to make them as successful as possible. That is the faith, to use your word, that in spite of some evidence that people may say it's X, Y, or Z, we continue to persevere because that's what we fundamentally believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So you use the word grounded, which I really love. I want to understand what grounds you. The health guys out there would say, okay, get grounded in a park, right? Go to Central Park, take your shoes off, put your feet in something, or go to the beach or whatever. Get out of the concrete jungle, which I love to do. People know that, mountains and all that stuff. But what grounds you, Afsheen? What really keeps you rooted and stable?
So it's other people, actually. So I enjoy nature, but I for better or worse, maybe it's a fundamental flaw in my psyche. I don't crave going out into the wilderness, and while I appreciate it, it doesn't recharge my batteries in the way that you're describing. Other people do. People who obviously my family, my girls, my wife, and my extended family, but the people that I work with and the people that I meet every day. One of the great privileges of having the job that I have, and one of the many reasons I know that it's the right role for me personally, is I get to travel the country and the world and meet all sorts of wonderful people and help to contribute to their personal and professional success. That gives me great gratification. That gives me great satisfaction. It recharges me karmically, if you forgive that word, and it's what keeps me grounded all the time.
Karmically, I like that. What a great word. So for people watching this who may feel unstable or ungrounded, but yet they're a high capacity leader, what's maybe a piece of perspective? I mean, you've accomplished a lot. You're a father, you're a husband, right? You're so much more than just the titles and the roles, but how would you recommend someone get to a place of being grounded and staying grounded while operating in that highest level of capability in business?
It's a great question. So I have like believe it or not, I think about these sorts of things a lot about how especially the younger generation. I'm not that young anymore, although my wife tells me I think I act more not my age sometimes. Um, but I feel like a lot of the folks, let's call them under 30 or even younger than that, have been disconnected from their own selves. So the famous expression "know thyself," I think, is the first thing that I would focus on. Really take some time to be introspective. Take some time to think about what actually you value, because everyone is different, right? And one of the wonderful things about being an adult is that you can choose to value the things you want to value. And I think not many people in this hyper stimulating modern world take some time to look inwards and say, what am I trying to achieve? What do I value? What am I trying to optimize for? That's the first thing I would do before I would do anything else. Once you've answered those questions, then you can talk about how you want to approach maximizing what you value. And by the way, I have no judgment about what people value. Some people can value making a ton of money. Some people can value living on a farm. Some people can value being a professional athlete. It's like I'm agnostic, and you should be too, about sort of about what others may value or not. But you need to be clear about what you value. And then once you're clear with what you really value, not with maybe what society has influenced you to value, then you can take actions in that direction. And once you do, I have found you get such an inner peace from that. As the challenges will still come, the difficulties will still come, but you'll have a peace knowing that you're going in the direction that's right for you.
Wow. We got Aristotle and spirituality all in the same sentence. I mean, there's so many ways we can go with this. There's three thoughts that come to my mind, but since you mentioned values and self-discovery, how do you stay connected to your values when maybe money, or let's just call it resources, right? Because it's more than just financial. It's people,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
You guys trying to start with the right people, the right knowledge, the understanding, the right application. What happens when those come into conflict?
Oh, well, that's why it's so challenging to figure
Right.
out what you actually value, because again, I'm going to be a little bit technical for a second. So for the folks in the audience who know what
Be
reinforcement learning
very
is,
technical. We have a
yeah,
highly technical audience,
yeah.
and we're
So
going to
the
get more
folks,
technical as a society, right?
for folks in the audience who are familiar with reinforcement learning, for those who don't know what that phrase means, it came actually originally from cognitive psychology. It's used in many parts of modern AI today. Most notably, DeepMind and AlphaGo used it most successfully. Anyway, so reinforcement learning, the core of reinforcement learning, is enunciating an expression called the utility function that this system is trying to optimize. So what I'm actually asking you to do is to find your own utility function. The reason I'm saying that now is because utility function is not just the identification of what the terms are, it is the coefficients as well.
Right.
That's important because it tells you how you trade things off against each other. Would you
Right.
trade off another $1 million versus living in the country? By the way, there's no objectively right answer to that. That's yours to decide. And
Right.
one of the gifts of being an adult is you decide. And it's a challenge. I'm not going to deny that it's a challenge. I went, like everyone else, I wanted to please my parents, and you're influenced by your parents, and they influence very strongly when you're growing up. And they should, and I say this as a parent now, they should influence the utility function of the child. But as you graduate from that, you need to decide,
Right.
well, is this the utility function I want for myself? And the easiest metric of whether or not you're using the right utility function is what I said before. Do you have peace when you make the trade-off? Because of course, everyone wants to maximize everything. I think one of the major lies the young people have been told is you can have it all. Nobody can have it all. And by the way, that's what makes life interesting, that you can't have it all. If I could
Right.
have everything I ever wanted, no matter what, and maximize in all dimensions, that's kind of a boring existence. The character is made when you make the trade-off. That's when character is formed.
Yeah.
And you have to
So good.
figure out how you want to make that trade-off for yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. I remember a book I read in, like, I think the 5th grade is, like, called All the Money in the World. You may remember this book where I think this guy named Quentin, he
Mm.
wishes for all the money in the world. He gets one wish. Well, he literally and physically gets all of the fiat currency dumped in his properties, like, literally, like, 20,000 tons of capital, and, like, no one else in the world has money, so he, like, has to solve, like, all those problems that come when you have all the physical fiat. But you mentioned the youth, and I really appreciate that because I read a stat and heard a quote yesterday from, well, there's really two kind of main quotes. One was from Harvard Public Health. Jonathan Haidt said Gen Z's first generation history go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that call them away from people nearby and into an alternative universe. You're kind of alluding to that, people looking down at their phone, walking through Manhattan, and you seeing, okay, yeah, the walk signs on, you walk, and you kind of have this like peripheral like adjustment for safety. But furthermore, there's another related quote that Jared Cooney Horvath said in Senate recently. Said for the first time in recorded history, Gen Z is underperforming their parents on virtually every cognitive measure: attention, memory, literacy, numeracy, and reasoning. What do we do as kind of, I would call us like elders and people investing in the future generations? Like, you have two kids, like two young kids. You said, like, how do parents kind of combat that?
Yeah, yeah, it's a huge challenge. First of all, I'd be remiss to say the obvious, which is I'm extremely blessed to have a wife who has a PhD at the junction of AI and neuroscience. As we met in the
Nice.
same lab, so
That's so
let me
cool.
just make that call out. She's a very dedicated mom and applies the rigor of science and the uniqueness of a mother's love to every day with our kids. So I would never claim to own even a material fraction of that day to day parenting. But that said, it's a challenge. But
Right.
B, if you prioritize it, you will make it happen. So let's say the obvious dumb things. Limit the screen time,
Right.
right? Don't
Like
give
2
your
hours
kids
a day max, basically.
yeah, don't give your kids phones until it's absolutely necessary. Don't have them on social media. These are just I'm just going to say things that thousands of people now have said, and they're
Right.
good. It's like how do you want to get a great body? Well, eat less, move more, and lift weights. I mean, it's simple, but
Exactly.
it's simple, but it's not easy, right?
Right.
So
Well,
I
because the
think it's
parents have to be real parents. They can't just be screen time parents, right?
so yes, I have obviously having parents of young kids. I understand the pull to say, look, let's just have some quiet. But it is a drug, right? I'm not to get again
Right.
too scientific here, but it does
No,
hit
it
the
definitely is.
dopaminergic system, which is the same system that every reward hits from cocaine to sex to others. It becomes addictive very quickly on a young developing brain, even more quickly than an adult brain.
Right.
We've seen it in our kids. If you give them too much screen time, they behave like addicts when you take it away. They have all the signs of addiction,
Right.
from bargaining
Theoretical,
to
biological,
to,
etc.
to, to violence to whining, to do that. So you have to say the course and say, well, I'm the parent here. And it's tough. I'm not going to claim to say that it's easy. It's absolutely
Yeah.
tough, because those kids are they have more dedication and energy at the outcome potentially than the parents do, because we do other things in addition to parenting the kids. So I just think it's a focus on it. The other thing I would say that's relevant is finding a community of like-minded parents. So we're very
Yeah.
lucky to have our girls have friends whose parents also value these things.
Right.
So we are all, but the famous expression, you're the average of your 5 closest friends. That's equally true for children. So if none of their friends are sitting here using all their phones all the time, then they will ask for it less. If none of their friends are on, various social media, then they will not ask for it as much. That's really, really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's like go outside, touch grass, ride a bike. Like before we had, cell phones and the internet, that's exactly what we did as kids. So you should
Yeah.
too. And surrounding yourself with people who can do that too. And, caretakers, babysitters, it takes a village, all the people who have the similar values and like-mindedness. That's so important. Okay, well, Afsheen, I feel like we could talk literally for days, but we do have a third category here of the future. So we
Yeah.
want to get into that future topic now.
Sure.
Let's talk about quantum and the future of technology.
Now, not all future is quantum and not all quantum is future. We also love to talk about space and nuclear, but our topic today is really about quantum security and AI infrastructure exposure. I'm curious, first of all, as someone from Wall Street, private sector, public sector, like where do you think quantum will be and maybe even the future of technology, let's say 10, 20 years out, just be really future oriented?
Yeah, yeah, that's such a timeline that's impossible for anyone, including me, to
Right. I don't want
guess.
you to make some bold claim like AGI is
Yeah.
going to be here next week or anything like that,
Yeah,
but like,
look, eventually we will crack this. I believe that eventually we will crack, we as a species will crack this quantum computing thing. That said, in my various roles, I've been pitched for 15 plus years that quantum computing is 2 years away. I mean,
right.
literally, I've had people come in my office say you should invest in XYZ company, to keep them
Right.
nameless, but you've heard of them because it's right around the door, it's right around the door, around the corner, right around the corner. So they've not been right, but eventually that way they will be right, right? I'm
Right.
not one
Right.
of the people who thinks it's infinitely far. No, technically they could be wrong for our lifetimes, but I do not think it's infinitely far in the future. I do think the progress has been sufficiently enticing, and especially in the past 3 years, that we may very well reasonably see quantum computing. Now, lucky for us, they have been wrong for 15 years. So the reason I say that is because a lot of infrastructure has been built in preparation for the one day they might be right. Right. So remember
Right.
the Y2K issue, right? And then it ended up being not a big issue at all, because although some things happened, most of the naysayers or the Armageddon predictors were proven wrong. And I think there's been so much work done that the negative impact to society will be blunted materially. What is that good work? Well, actually, let me take a step back. Quantum computing, quick definition. Quantum computing means using a computational computer that uses the mathematics and physics of quantum mechanics in order to solve problems, a certain class of problems, much more rapidly than current traditional computers. And what are the class of problems? They are problems that would involve simultaneously evaluating many different possibilities. And that comes from the physics of entanglement, and I won't bore the audience with all that stuff. But suffice it to say that that's how the quantum computer works. So what are problems that require considering multiple different possibilities at the same time? They are in the finance world, risk; in the biological world, pharmaceutical drug creation; but most importantly, in the cryptographic world, which is security. Folks may know that the way almost everything is encrypted today uses a process that involves factoring large products of prime numbers. I won't bore you with why that is. Suffice it to say that quantum computing, through an algorithm that was derived a few decades ago, theoretically can solve this problem in a much faster way than current traditional computers could. The end result of that is all the data that's been encrypted on the planet, whether it's at rest or in motion, whether it's on your laptop, in Google Drive, or being transmitted between your phone and someone else, that could potentially be cracked with this technology. Now, what are we going to do about that? Well, there's been a lot of people that have worked on that. There's new cryptographic mechanisms called PQC, post-quantum cryptography, that uses algorithms and cryptographic methods that would not be as susceptible to these quantum attacks as the current methodologies are. There are certain different infrastructures that can utilize these things. You can actually go on Cloudflare and use it today. I don't have any association with Cloudflare, by the way. And there's a bunch of other places you can go use it. So that's generally the state, and why I'm not super concerned about it, but we should not ignore it either.
Wow. First of all, thank you for that. And if you're listening to this, go back to episodes 1 through 30, where every day we have a very basic intro to quantum in the quantum section. I think you articulated that really well, especially because like how for 15 years it's been 2 years away. So at some point you hit a limit function. But anyways, final future question is really about finance. So where do you feel that private equity will go maybe in the next 5, 6 years by 2030? Like how will it look differently by 2030?
Well, that I have a much stronger answer, because
Right.
we view ourselves as part of that transformation.
Exactly.
It needs to be much more tech native, and I'm using tech more broadly.
Right.
And
It's about
and
innovation, reinvention.
And part of that is just being more operator native. One of the things that I saw firsthand with my exposure to the industry is there is a segmentation between folks who call themselves investors and folks who call themselves operators. And
Right.
even terminology, I think, tells you the cultural distinction, right? That is, in my view, a direct place for disruption all the way up and down the players, right? Every player you've heard of, I think, suffers from that cultural challenge. Again, one of the reasons why I wanted to found my own firm is I view myself, and I think I can credibly say this, as a bona fide technologist, as well as a bona fide investor. I think that combination, that hybrid, is necessary for the next generation of private equity firms and investors in general.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, we're almost out of time here, Afsheen. It's been awesome, but we do have a quick lightning round, which I didn't tell you about because I just want very quick, off the cuff answers if you're ready for it. So are you ready for our lightning rapid fire round? Let's go.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right,
42.
one book everyone should read.
One book everyone should read. How to make friends and influence people.
Love it. Very empathetic. One investment you'd make today, like 12 o'clock noon.
I would still buy NVIDIA.
Nice. One habit you refuse to compromise on.
Sleep.
One technology you're most excited about.
AI.
Tech you're most concerned about.
AI.
Nice. Biggest lesson from Wall Street.
Biggest lesson from Wall Street. You can be consensus oriented, but still be decisive.
I like that. And what about biggest lesson from entrepreneurship?
Sometimes you can't please everybody.
And finally, best advice you've ever received.
Best advice I've ever received. Can I swear?
Sure.
You can be an asshole as long as you're predictable.
Predictable asshole. Nice. Well, that wraps up our lightning round. You pass with flying colors, love it, very decisive. And we're going to get into our Beyond the Bag anchor segment to close it out.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have this sitting next to me. I'm actually in my home office. So this is something my girls make. They love Legos. To your earlier part of our conversation around raising kids, I'm huge. This is going to sound so silly, but I'm a huge Lego fan because
Nice.
obviously it's fine motor control, which, believe it or not, when you have a phone, folks lose it. I've lost it.
Right.
It is planning, right? Because you're building something for a long period of time.
Right.
It is frustration management. This is frustrating. I mean, especially those little fingers, sometimes it's hard to take it out. And when they work together, it's collaboration. And obviously it's not a screen. So it brings focus, a lot of focus, the hours doing this. So big fans, not to say you have to do Legos, but something that ticks those boxes. As parents, we love that.
Nice. I love it. Well, that wraps up our episode. I would love for you folks to go ahead and follow Afsheen and his company. And we're just going to share your website here. So what's the best way for people to stay connected with you and get connected with Pilot Wave?
Sure. So the website is a great place to get information. Obviously, you can contact the firm at info@pilotwaveholdings.com, but we are on social media, LinkedIn socials. I personally post LinkedIn X, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Nice. So follow Afsheen on LinkedIn. Let's go. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Afsheen. I feel like I made a new friend in the city. It's really great to get your perspective, both from Wall Street and running a firm. I have a lot of follow-up thoughts and questions, but your team was really wonderful in getting this together. Thanks so much, and we'll be back next week as well. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the show. We'll see you on all socials.